Frank first noticed the man in the winter of 2018 just as the snow started sticking. He was bent behind the dumpster, arranging cardboard like it was fine china, thin gloves, torn at the palms. His breath puffed in white clouds, slow and steady, as though he wasn't freezing his ass off in 16-degree wind. At first, Frank figured he was casing the place, maybe waiting for the staff to turn their backs before digging through the trash. But that never happened. The man didn't scavenge. He just existed, like a shadow cast by the building that refused to move. He wasn't young, but not quite old either. Mid-40s maybe, though the beard and sunken cheeks made it hard to tell. Military buzz cut grown out unevenly, gray at the edges. There was a quietness to him that didn't feel timid, more like a man who'd stopped expecting the world to offer him anything worth responding to. He didn't beg, didn't panhandle, didn't make signs or ask for change. He sat by the same crate every morning like he had a right to be there, like he was holding vigil over something no one else could see. Frank ignored him for the first few days. He wasn't a bleeding heart, and he wasn't in the business of handing out freebies. He owned the diner, paid the bills, kept the lights on. That alley wasn't a charity, it was where his grease trap overflowed during rush hour, and where kids sometimes tagged the back wall with lazy spray paint ghosts. He had no time for squatters. But then, one morning, after an overnight ice storm, Frank came out to toss trash and found the guy clearing snow with his sleeves not for himself, but to keep the back door accessible. Didn't say a word. Didn't even look up. That afternoon, Frank poured an extra black coffee and left it by the crate near the fan vent. No lid, no sugar, just steam curling in the cold air. The man didn't drink it while Frank was watching, but the cup was gone by the next morning. The ritual stuck. No words were exchanged. Just coffee, 5 days a week, 6 hours, sharp. If the guy wasn't there, Frank left it anyway. Sometimes it stayed, sometimes not. The mystery gnawed at Frank, but not in a bad way. It was like feeding a feral cat. You never pet it, never coax it close, but its silent survival feels like a small win. Other people noticed. A few of the waitresses gossiped about the guy in the back. One called him Santa Claus's lost brother. Another said she caught him reading a Bible one morning, muttering under his breath like a preacher. Customers didn't see him unless they came through the alley. But delivery guys did. A new meat supplier once complained, asked if Frank wanted him cleared out. Frank didn't even respond, just stared until the guy muttered an apology and dropped the invoice. There were nights Frank found himself staring out the small kitchen window toward the back, trying to figure the man out. He watched the way he layered newspapers between his coat and shirt, how he rearranged his makeshift bedding with care, folding the tarp just so. The man had discipline, method, like someone who'd learned to survive by habit alone. Frank wasn't stupid. He'd seen enough broken veterans come through his town over the years to know the signs. The 1,000-yard stare, the flinch at sudden sounds, the way he always kept his back to a wall. Still, there were no stories, no drunken monologues, no sudden breakdowns or pleas for help. Just a presence steady and silent, like part of the landscape. Frank started timing his mornings around the man's schedule. If he arrived too early, he'd catch him sleeping. And something about that felt intrusive. Too late, and he might miss the coffee ritual. The middle ground became habit. He didn't know the man's name, didn't ask, but he started thinking of him as Sarge, not out of mockery, more like a quiet hunch. The posture, the restraint, the grim look of someone who'd seen too much and said too little for far too long. Sarge never smiled, but he nodded sometimes, a single, sharp motion when the coffee cup was fresh. Then came the snowstorm in January, 2 feet overnight. The city plows didn't hit their block until noon. Frank arrived early to prep and found the alley blanketed, the crates buried, and no sign of Sarge. He stood in the back doorway longer than he'd meant to, holding the styrofoam cup like a totem, searching for footprints or any sign of movement. Nothing. He left the coffee anyway, dug out a space on the crate with his elbow, and set it down like a candle at a memorial. When he came back that evening to take out the trash, the cup was untouched, snow drifting into the black liquid, cooling it into sludge. Sarge didn't return the next day, or the one after that. By the end of the week, Frank felt his patience fray. He tried to tell himself it wasn't personal. The man didn't owe him anything. Maybe he'd moved on. Maybe a shelter took him in. Maybe, and this one lingered, maybe something worse had happened. And no one would ever know. Frank started sleeping poorly. He imagined Sarge frozen somewhere behind a dumpster, buried beneath the snow with no one to care. He kept the coffee habit going anyway, for a while, like muscle memory. But eventually, even that faded. A month passed. Then another. Sarge became part ghost, part guilt. Then, one March morning, Frank was taking the trash out after a heavy late-season storm and saw something glinting in the snow near the crates. Not much, just a flicker of gold. Half buried. The coffee hit the ground first, then Frank hit his knees. That was the moment the story stopped being routine and started becoming a mystery. The first thing Frank noticed was the silence. Not the absence of footsteps or muttered prayers from the alley those had come and gone before. But this was different. This was a silence with weight. Like something had been lifted, not just removed, something that wasn't supposed to be gone. He waited 3 days before admitting it to himself the man was missing. Not gone for a break, not off to a clinic or a family visit, just missing. As if the alley had swallowed him whole. On the 4th day, Frank circled the block during the lunch lull. The alley was unchanged, but somehow emptier. The crates looked misplaced without the man sitting there, huddled and still. Trash was building up in a crooked pile near the corner. The graffiti was untouched, that weird melting crown someone had sprayed months back, but the world had shifted just enough to make it feel off-kilter. The kind of wrong that doesn't scream. It whispers. Frank told himself he wasn't worried. He told himself that every day. But each morning he found himself stepping outside earlier than usual, scanning the horizon of dumpsters like a man expecting a ghost to materialize. The coffee cup stayed untouched now. He still left it, out of habit, or maybe defiance, maybe hope. By the 2nd week, customers started asking questions. "Hey Frank, where's your watchdog?" one of the construction guys joked. "Guy finally move up in the world?" asked another. Frank didn't have an answer. He shrugged. Said something like, "Guess he found somewhere warmer," then walked away before they could push it. But the truth was, he'd already made a quiet trip to the precinct, spoke to a desk sergeant he knew from back in high school, asked if any John Does had been found near the river. Got a side glance, some paperwork. No answers. They didn't even know who he was looking for. No name, no ID. Just a face Frank had never photographed and a presence that had slipped out of his life without a footprint. That night, the diner emptied out early. Rain hissed against the windows. Frank stayed behind to wipe counters that were already clean. The silence in the dining room was thick. He poured himself a coffee, leaned on the counter, and stared at the medallion he'd found in the snow, the same one that had triggered this whole unraveling. For Valor and Sergeant James A. Knox, the thing was, it didn't belong there. Not in the alley. Not buried in snow behind a dumpster. It felt deliberate, but also forgotten, like someone had held it tight for years, then one day decided it didn't mean anything anymore, or couldn't bear to keep it. Frank turned it over in his hand again, thumb brushing the frayed edge of the ribbon. He didn't know medals, didn't know ranks or ribbons or citations, but he knew this whatever this medal meant. The man behind the diner had earned it, and he'd left it behind like trash. Frank stood up, grabbed his jacket, and walked back into the kitchen. He dug out a flashlight and pulled open the back door. Rain had turned the snow to slush. The alley stank of runoff and rot. He pushed toward the crate now splintered from cold, one leg broken clean off. He knelt, hand pressed into the wet concrete for balance, and began pulling aside the tarp Sarge used as a windbreak. Nothing, no bag, no belongings, no scraps of food or books or signs of a rushed exit. The man had vanished with surgical precision. Frank stood there in the rain until the flashlight dimmed to a flicker. The silence pressed in again, this time louder than ever. Something was wrong. The next day, He tried another shelter, this one a few blocks away, under the train line. He described the man, the crate, the coffee. The volunteer nodded politely, flipped through a notebook, said they hadn't seen anyone like that. "We get a lot of guys through here," she said, "but most don't stick." He thanked her and left. It became a routine, shelter to shelter, church basement to outreach center. He never gave a name because he didn't have one, just a face, a presence, a question that gnawed, and always. He carried the medal, not in his pocket, not around his neck, but close. A talisman, a trigger. It wasn't until the third shelter, a little place inside a converted laundromat on the east side, that someone blinked at the name. "Knox," the woman repeated. "James Knox." She stood, disappeared into a back room, and returned with a file. "He came through here once, last fall, didn't stay, just sat in the corner for a few nights, never talked. Then one day, he was gone." Frank's throat felt tight. "You sure?" She nodded. "We keep logs." He signed in. That's the name he gave. He left with a photocopy of the intake form. Barely anything on it. Just a scrawl of James A. Knox in shaky pen and the word veteran under background. No phone, no address, no next of kin. That night, Frank didn't sleep. He sat in his office at the back of the diner, the medal between his fingers, the intake form open on the desk, and a notebook in front of him. At the top, he wrote 2 words, "Find Knox." The man had vanished, but Frank wasn't ready to let him stay gone. Not yet. Frank never thought an object could haunt him. People, sure. Memories, always. But a 2-inch circle of tarnished brass with a frayed ribbon. He couldn't stop staring at it. It sat on the shelf above the griddle, just far enough from the grease splatter to stay clean. He kept it there like it might start talking, like it held answers if he watched it long enough. It was real, that much he'd confirmed. He'd Googled Silver Star and found dozens of identical medals, awarded for gallantry in action. Some were given posthumously, others pinned to chests in awkward ceremonies before men and women returned to private lives and dark memories. James A. Knox. The name sounded sturdy, military, like it had weight behind it, like it belonged to someone who once mattered a whole damn lot. Frank couldn't shake the thought that the man behind the diner Sarge had buried this medal on purpose. Not accidentally lost it. Not dropped it. Buried it. Like he wanted it out of reach. Like he didn't believe he deserved it anymore. That was the part Frank couldn't let go. The diner kept running. Of course. People still needed their eggs over easy, their triple stack of pancakes, their quiet booth and second cup of coffee. But something had shifted in Frank. He moved slower, missed small things. He burned bacon twice in the same week, and Tammy, the lead waitress, gave him a look like he was losing his edge. He didn't care. Each night after closing, he took the medal down, wiped it clean, and turned it over in his hands. Same name, same words. "For valor, Sergeant James A. Knox." He said it aloud now when he read it. Like speaking the name kept the man tethered to the world, like it stopped him from becoming another file in some forgotten cabinet of dead veterans no one remembered. The notebook started piling up. Frank had never been the kind to write things down, but something about this needed structure. He started with a timeline. First sighting winter 2018. Daily appearances, coffee ritual, disappearance February 2023. Medal found March 2nd. He listed every shelter he'd called, every church, outreach center, and veteran hotline. He kept a folder of flyers and pamphlets, some with handwritten notes scribbled in the margins. Eventually, he started a second notebook just for the questions. Why leave the medal behind? Why here? Why Frank was he saying goodbye? Sometimes Frank woke in the middle of the night with more questions. He'd write them down, bleary-eyed and frustrated. He was a diner cook, not a detective. He didn't know what he was doing. But he knew this. The man who'd sat behind his building for 5 years didn't belong in a ditch or an unmarked grave. He wasn't trash. He mattered. And if no one else was going to act like it, Frank would. He started calling the VA. At first, he got bounced around. Wrong departments. Voicemail loops. One guy actually laughed when Frank said he didn't have a social security number or a birth date, just a name and a medal. But eventually, he got someone with a trace of human decency. James A. Knox, Frank repeated slowly. Army, Silver Star, probably served early 2000s. He was here, in upstate New York, homeless. Might have had PTSD. There was typing, long silence. Then we've got a record. Honorably discharged, served in Kandahar, multiple commendations. Frank felt like the floor shifted. He's still alive. Another pause. We have no record of death, but no activity either, no benefits withdrawals, no medical visits since 2015. He dropped off the radar. Frank rubbed his face. You got an address, contact anything. Nothing current. But I'll flag this. If he comes in, we'll alert you. Frank thanked him, hung up, and sat for a long time staring at the diner's clock tick past midnight. It wasn't closure, but it was something. The next day, he took the medal to a local pawn shop. Not to sell it, to ask questions. The owner, Carl, was ex-Navy. Still wore the old jacket like a badge. He squinted at the medal under a desk lamp, turning it carefully between gloved hands. This is the real thing, he said. Serial stamped here confirms it was government issued, not a replica, not a souvenir. You've seen many of these, Carl nodded slowly. A few, usually brought in by desperate folks. Sometimes stolen. You find this. Frank didn't answer right away. Then out back of my place, buried in snow. Carl looked up. Someone let go of this on purpose. You mean? I think so. Carl set the medal down carefully. Man gives up something like this. He's not just broke. He's broken. Frank nodded. That was what he'd been afraid of all along. That night, Frank dreamed of boots in the snow, not his combat boots, laced tight, standing alone in the alley, pointed toward the horizon. No footprints leading to them. No body. Just the boots and the crate. In the dream, the crate was burning. He woke up in a sweat. And the next morning, without even thinking, he moved the medal from the shelf to his pocket. It stayed there all day. He told himself it was about keeping it safe. But deep down, he knew better. He wasn't just holding on to a medal. He was carrying a burden. Frank didn't have a plan. He had a name, a medal, and an ache in his gut that wouldn't go away. That was it. But routine had always been his compass. And now that routine had a new direction, find Knox. He started small. Printed flyers. Just black and white with a grainy sketch, not a photo, because there wasn't one. Just a hand-drawn approximation Frank had roughed out with a ballpoint pen on the back of a placemat. Beard, tired eyes, heavy coat, caption underneath. Looking for James A. Knox, U.S. Army veteran, known to frequent the East 18th Street area, last seen February 2023. If seen, please contact Frank at Lou's Diner. He posted them on telephone poles, inside shelters, outside churches, and slipped a few under windshields of patrol cars. Some people crumpled them. Others took them seriously. Mostly, though, he got shrugs. Frank was used to being ignored in the bigger schemes of the world. He ran a diner, not a campaign. But this felt personal. The man had been in his life 5 years without a single word, and now that he was gone, he was the loudest silence Frank had ever known. He made a map, a city grid on a whiteboard above his desk in the back office, marked every location Knox might have gone, shelters, abandoned buildings, train stations, places he could blend in or disappear altogether. It looked like a conspiracy board by week 2. Tammy noticed it one morning when she came in early. You still on that mission, she asked. Frank didn't answer. He just grunted and returned to his list. You ever think maybe he doesn't want to be found? Frank stopped, looked up. Yeah, he said. I think about it every damn day. He dug deeper. That meant calling hospitals, VA clinics, digging through online forums for missing veterans. Some were helpful. Most were dead ends. One nurse said a man matching that description came into urgent care months ago, frostbite on his fingers, dehydrated, refused to stay overnight. No ID. Gave a fake name and walked out before they could run blood work. That could have been him, Frank muttered, writing it down anyway. The online searches got darker. He found Reddit threads about vets sleeping under bridges, forums for families looking for sons who never came home or came back as someone else, ghosts in combat boots. A few usernames kept popping up. He messaged one, a guy named Drifterdown, said he worked with displaced vets, Might have crossed paths with Knox. The reply came the next day. Met someone by that name in Albany last year. Didn't talk much. Real quiet. Had the look. You know, like he'd seen the devil and walked away empty. Said he didn't belong anywhere anymore. That confirmed it. Knox wasn't just drifting, he was actively erasing himself. Frank leaned back in his chair, exhaling. That made it harder, but not impossible. He circled Albany on the map and made plans for a drive. The trip took a day. Frank walked the streets near the river, spoke to outreach workers, and visited 2 encampments on the edge of the city. He carried copies of the flyer, showed the medal to one vet named Curtis, who nodded slowly and said, "Yeah, I remember that guy." Didn't say his name. Slept 2 tents down for a week. Then vanished one morning before sunrise. Frank asked if he'd said anything at all. Only once. Curtis said, "I asked him where he was from. He said, 'Nowhere worth returning to.'" Then he went quiet. Frank stood there a while, just absorbing that. He thanked Curtis, handed him a hot meal voucher from the local soup kitchen, and drove home. Knox was still out there. Somewhere. But every step Frank took forward also reminded him of something sobering not everyone wants to be found. At the diner, things felt hollow. The kitchen clatter didn't have the same rhythm. The morning rush didn't carry the usual charm. Regulars noticed. "You all right? Frank, you look like you lost a bet." He just kept working, kept digging, kept checking alleys when he went on supply runs, kept leaving the coffee by the crate, even though it hadn't been touched in weeks. He told himself it was about closure. But the truth was, it was about guilt. That 5 years had passed with no questions. And now that it was too late, he wanted all the answers. Late one night, he opened the notebook again. Next to the old list of questions, he added a new one. What am I really trying to fix him, or myself? He didn't have an answer. Just more coffee, more silence, more waiting. Then came the break. It was a Tuesday. Quiet morning. Rain pinging the windows like fingers tapping glass. The phone rang just after Frank finished chopping onions. "Lou's Diner," he answered. "Is this Frank, you the one asking about James Knox?" Frank froze. "Yeah." "This is Holly," the voice said. "I run a transitional shelter in Grover, about 30 miles out. We've got a guy here. Doesn't talk much, but matches everything on your flyer. Same name, too." Frank was already grabbing his keys. He arrived before lunch. The shelter was tucked behind an old post office, a squat brick building with peeling paint and a cracked sidewalk. Holly met him out front. "He's in the rec room," she said. "Hasn't said 2 full sentences in 3 days. But when I showed him your flyer, he didn't look away, just stared at it for a long time." Frank stepped inside. The walls smelled like sanitizer and old books. Down a short hall, past a bulletin board covered in veteran resources, was a room with a busted TV playing static. And there in the corner, slouched but not asleep, was Sarge. Knox, the man he'd fed coffee to. The man who'd vanished. He looked up slowly, eyes hollow but tracking. Frank stepped in. "I've been looking for you," he said. Knox blinked. "Why?" Frank held up the medal. "Because you dropped this. And I don't think you're finished yet." Frank didn't push. Not that first day. He just sat across from Knox in the quiet rec room, medal in hand, letting the silence hang between them like a drawbridge half raised. Knox looked different, older, thinner, like something inside had been carved out and not replaced. But it was him. Same beard, same eyes. The man from the alley behind the diner. The ghost who disappeared without a sound. Frank placed the medal on the table between them, not saying a word. Knox stared at it for a long time. Didn't reach for it. Didn't even blink. "Eventually," he muttered, "I didn't lose it." "I know," Frank said. A long pause. "I didn't think I'd need it anymore." Frank nodded. "Yeah, I figured that." That was all they said. Frank drove home that night in silence. The diner passed by in a blur. The alleys, the snowbanks, the red glow of stoplights. It all felt dreamlike. But one thought pulsed beneath the surface, growing louder with every mile. If Knox had truly been ready to disappear, he wouldn't have left that medal. He would have taken it to the grave. He'd left it to be found. The next morning, Frank was back behind the diner with a shovel. The snow had softened overnight, patches of pavement bleeding through. The crate was half collapsed now, warped from months of rot. Frank pushed it aside. Something had been gnawing at him for weeks that there was more. That a man who'd lived behind a building for 5 years didn't just vanish without leaving behind a trace. 10 minutes in, the shovel hit something hard, not metal, more like canvas stretched tight. He dropped to his knees and dug with gloved hands, heart pounding. A duffel bag. Filthy, weather-beaten. The zipper rusted at the edge. He tugged it loose and laid it flat on the broken pavement. Inside, a mess of crumpled clothing. A ziploc of loose dog tags, none of them his, and at the very bottom, a bundle of papers wrapped in plastic. Photos. Mostly. A woman and a boy. Same pair, different years. The boy gets older in each shot. The woman stays the same, tired but holding it together. In one picture, the boy wears a Halloween costume, his smile too wide for his face. Frank lingered on that one. Something about it hit different. The kind of photo you keep not because it's perfect, but because it hurts less than forgetting. There was also a Bible water-damaged but intact with an inscription on the front page. To James, come back whole, love, Leah, and finally, a notebook. Frank brought it inside, set it on the counter like it might detonate. He waited until the diner closed. Waited until the last fry cook clocked out and the final register closed. Only then did he sit down at his office desk and open the first page. Sept 8. Didn't sleep again. The noise outside sounds like mortar. Just a truck. But the brain doesn't care. Tried not to scream. Still did. Frank turned the page. Sept 12. There's a kid now. Across the street. Laughs like my son used to. Don't know if I have a son anymore. Papers said they moved. Sept 23, I didn't die out there, but something did. Oct 2. The guy from the diner left coffee again. Didn't ask anything. That means something. Right. Frank sat back, stunned. The journal wasn't just scribbles. It was a record. A map of a man unraveling slowly, quietly. Pages and pages of fragmented thoughts. Names scratched out. Addresses half-remembered. Dreams relived in real time. On some nights, he counted stars. On others, body bags. Nov 5. I told myself I was just passing through. But I'm still here. Maybe because the coffee's hot. Or because I want to be found. But not too fast. Not by everyone. Nov 19. There are 2 ways to disappear. One is fast. The other is coffee. Crates. Silence. Frank closed the notebook, his throat tight. This was more than guilt. This was a confession wrapped in frost and folded into silence. He drove back to Grover the next day. Knox was in the same chair, same slouch. But something was different. His eyes were more focused, alert, maybe even waiting. Frank didn't speak, just set the duffel on the table and took a seat. Knox stared at it, but didn't touch it. You left this behind, Frank said. I know. There's a notebook inside. Knox blinked slowly. You read it. Frank nodded. Not all of it. Enough. Silence. Then I wasn't supposed to be there that long. Knox said, behind your diner. I just needed a place to not exist for a while. And then, time kept going. Why didn't you say anything? Knox gave a tired smile. You didn't ask. Frank exhaled hard through his nose. I gave you coffee every damn day. I noticed they sat there a while. The bag between them like a line neither wanted to cross. Finally, Knox reached for it, pulled the Bible out, turned to the first page. To James, come back whole. He closed it slowly, looked up. I didn't come back whole. Frank shrugged. You came back. That's the part that matters. James Knox stood in the alley behind Lou's diner, staring at the stack of crates like he was seeing the past in double exposure. It had taken 2 more weeks of silence. Coffee, and one conversation about nothing weather, football, the taste of diner meatloaf before Frank even suggested he come back. Not to live out back. Inside. Upstairs. The apartment above the diner had been empty since Frank's nephew tried and failed to open a podcast studio. Now it held a mattress, a working heater, and one chipped desk. It wasn't much, but for a man who'd chosen to vanish, it was sanctuary. When Knox crossed the threshold into that room, he didn't speak, just looked around like he was waiting to be kicked back out. Frank didn't say a word either, just handed him the key and left. Knox didn't come downstairs for 3 days. Frank left food outside the door. Quiet knock, plastic tray, no pressure. The meals came back empty. No messages, no conversation, but he was eating. Then, on the 4th morning, the bell above the kitchen door jingled and Frank turned to see Knox standing there, hands in his pockets, looking like he didn't belong anywhere. "You need help back here?" Knox asked. Frank paused, looked him over. His coat had been cleaned, somehow. Face shaved, sort of. His eyes were clearer. "You know how to use a scrub brush." "Pretty sure." Frank nodded toward the sink. "Let's see." It started small. Dishes, sweeping, wiping down the walk-in. Knox didn't complain, didn't talk much either. But he moved with quiet efficiency, and that mattered more than words. By the end of the week, Tammy noticed. "New dishwasher?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Temporary," Frank said. But Knox kept showing up, kept scrubbing, kept disappearing back upstairs at the end of every shift without a fuss. No paycheck yet. Frank knew better than to insult him with that too soon, but there was always a hot meal and a stocked fridge upstairs. Then came the Sunday rush. One of the line cooks no-showed. Frank was buried in orders, bacon burning, ticket rail overflowing. Knox stepped up without being asked. Watched the grill once, watched Frank twice, then grabbed a spatula and got to work. 2 hours later, the storm passed, plates out, tables cleared, customers satisfied. Frank looked over. Knox was cleaning the flat top. "You done this before?" Frank asked. Knox just shrugged. "You don't forget. Word got out. Not about the medal. Not about the years in the alley." Frank kept that quiet. But regulars noticed the man behind the grill, noticed how he worked, noticed how he never looked anyone in the eye too long, like he was afraid they'd see the pieces still taped together. Most folks were polite, some were curious. One man, a local vet named Danny, left his number on a receipt and wrote, "If you ever want to talk, no pressure." Knox folded it up and slipped it in his pocket. Didn't say a word, but he kept it. Tammy started calling him Grill Ghost when he wasn't around. Not mean, just matter of fact. Like everyone knew he wasn't staying forever, but while he was here, things somehow ran smoother. Even the coffee tasted better. One night, weeks into his return, Frank found Knox standing behind the diner, just staring at the empty spot where the crate used to be. "You ever miss it?" Frank asked. Lighting a cigarette he didn't really want, Knox didn't turn around. "No, but I remember it. Every damn second." They stood there in the cold a while, watching nothing. "I used to think disappearing was the only way to not be a burden," Knox said. "But hiding's heavy too. Heavier than I thought." Frank nodded. "Yeah. People don't realize silence weighs something." Knox kicked a pebble toward the curb. "You ever think maybe you shouldn't have gotten involved?" Frank took a drag. "Every day, but here we are." Spring came early that year. The snow melted fast. The alley dried out. And one morning Frank noticed something different on the bench out back. A thermos. Not his. Knox had left it. Coffee inside. Still hot. Frank sat down and drank half of it without thinking. Inside. The lunch rush picked up. Tammy waved through the window. Someone burned toast. But for a few minutes, Frank just sat there outside, on a bench that used to be a grave marker for a man who no longer lived in shadows, sipping coffee and thinking about how weird it is, the way people come back to life when you leave the door unlocked. He looked at the crate, now chopped up for firewood, at the sky split wide with sunlight, and smiled. There was no big ceremony, no newspaper headline, no local hero returns moment with a brass band and a folded flag. That's not how Knox would have wanted it. What there was quietly, steadily, was a man learning how to live again, one shift at a time. Knox started taking longer walks. At first, just around the block, then through the park, then to a community center where a vet named Danny, the same guy who left his number, ran a Tuesday night group. He didn't speak the first 2 times, just sat in the back, arms crossed, but he kept showing up. One week, he brought coffee for the whole room. Frank didn't say anything when he noticed half the box of diner cups was missing. The apartment upstairs became more than just shelter. Knox cleaned it, organized it, fixed the sink with a set of tools Frank didn't even know he owned. One night, Frank heard music through the ceiling, faint, low, but unmistakably jazz. He smiled. Jazz meant someone was trying to feel human again. Downstairs, the diner got back to normal or something better than normal. Knox never took tips. Wouldn't let customers hand him cash. But when a college kid left a drawing of the diner scribbled in pen on a napkin, Knox taped it to the walk-in freezer. No one took it down. Eventually, he let Frank put him on payroll, refused to take full shifts. But he showed up early, stayed late, fixed the busted outlet in booth 3, repaired the ancient toaster that had sparked like a bomb for 3 years. "You're turning into a handyman," Frank joked one afternoon. Knox just shrugged. Feels good to fix things that stay fixed. One day, a reporter came in, young guy, wide eyes, tape recorder like a toy hanging from his coat. "I heard there's a vet working here who used to live behind the place," he said. Frank didn't flinch. "You hear a lot of stories." He said, "Most of them don't leave a tip." The kid laughed, waited, got the message. He left with a grilled cheese and no story. Knox never heard about it. Or if he did, he never asked. That spring, the diner held its 25th anniversary. Tammy suggested balloons. Frank said hell no, but she did a chalkboard sign out front. 25 years of breakfast, burnt toast, and bad coffee but good company. People came out, regulars, old-timers, new faces. Someone brought a cake. Someone brought a guitar. A kid sang an off-key version of Happy Birthday to the griddle. Knox stood near the back, quiet, arms folded. Frank waved him closer. He hesitated, then stepped forward. Frank handed him a spatula. "Think you're ready for the big time?" he asked. Knox smiled, a real one this time. Still crooked, still cautious. But it reached his eyes. "I've seen worse kitchens," he said. It wasn't a perfect ending. There were still hard nights. Knox still kept the notebook beside his bed, still flinched at loud noises, still checked the locks twice before sleeping. But he was here, not hiding, not running, and that counted for something. Frank, for his part, stopped asking when Knox might leave. The question no longer mattered. The man who used to be a shadow now had weight, voice, presence. He belonged, even if he didn't always believe it. Some mornings, Frank still made 2 coffees, left one on the bench out back, just in case. Not because he expected it to be taken, but because he remembered what it meant to be noticed quietly, without fanfare, to be found. Epilogue. 3 years later, a customer left a Silver Star replica on the counter with a note. "Saw the story in a veteran's newsletter. Didn't know you were still alive. We all thought you died in 14. Glad we were wrong." Knox read it in the kitchen, didn't say a word. But the next day, he came in early and mounted the real medal, his medal, in a small shadow box on the wall near the register. No sign, no explanation, just one small plaque beneath it, carried by a man who made it home the long way. Frank didn't say anything, just nodded, poured 2 coffees, and set one on the bench outside. The sun was rising, the alley was quiet, and this time, no one was missing. The story reminds us that healing doesn't always look like triumph. It often looks like survival, quiet gestures, and second chances offered without judgment. It teaches us the value of paying attention, of extending care even when we don't understand someone's pain. Frank didn't save Knox with grand speeches or charity. He showed up, stayed consistent, and treated a broken man with dignity. And Knox, despite everything lost, proved that a life isn't over just because it's come apart. Sometimes, all it takes to begin again is a hot cup of coffee and someone who refuses to look away. Thank you for watching and being part of this story. Your time and attention mean everything. If this resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment like this again. We're building a community that values real stories, second chances, and the quiet strength it takes to keep going. Got thoughts, reactions, or ideas for what you want to see next? Drop a comment below. Your feedback shapes what we create, and we'd love to hear from you.